agree with him and Prime Minister. We saw. And
Disney is bringing him back on the air tomorrow. ABC says in a statement that we made the decision last week to suspend production to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment. But now, after having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy, the ABC says we reached the decision to return the show on Tuesday. So Kimmel's getting back to work.
Wow, Brian, that is significant, especially given that some of the players outside of Disney in a corporate setting, like Nexstar and Sinclair, they essentially have deals that allowed them to preempt his show, and that's part of the reason that it was suspended. Yeah. Do we know how they might react to this?
We don't, and that becomes the big question now. Will these local station affiliates choose to air Jimmy Kimmel Live, or will they continue to protest the comedian, even though the network is bringing him back nationwide? ABC does gently chastise Kimmel in this statement. The statement says, quote, "The decision to suspend him, we made it because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive." So they're very gently saying they disagreed with Kimmel last week, but obviously they're bringing him back as of tomorrow.
And we don't know, obviously, all of the considerations that went into this, Brian. But I would say leaders, obviously, at ABC and Disney have had the benefit of a few days of feedback.
Yeah, including from Disney employees who were very disturbed, including from Hollywood stars and showrunners, the kind of people Disney wants to work with, and from free speech groups, politicians, even some Republican politicians like Ted Cruz. We know the condemnation of Disney has been widespread. Now, what we don't know yet is what the counter reaction will be from President Trump and his allies.
That's a really good point. Brian, please stand by. Terry, your reaction to this news?
It's great news. It's great news. And I think you're absolutely right, and Brian is absolutely right. This was a community standing up for the rights of Jimmy Kimmel and all people who speak in public, entertainers and journalists and all of them. And it worked, at least with the head of Disney. And it makes good sense because they would have won in court. One thing that gets lost in this, you do not lose your First Amendment rights because you have a broadcast license. The Supreme Court has been clear on this. The government cannot take your license because of speech they don't like.
You were talking about Katharine Graham when the news broke, and these are the considerations of these bigger companies about how they're going to handle this and how they're going to think about it. They do have the benefit of some history as they do consider these moves.
Right. Well, Katharine Graham, when Nixon threatened to take her FCC, the Washington Post's FCC licenses, they had some local stations. It was a main source of income. She published them anyway. She said, forget about it. And that kind of corporate courage is rare, especially in the face of an administration that exceeds by many orders of magnitude any other presidency trying to silence speech it doesn't like.
If we still have Brian, I want to go back to him because one of the interesting bits of reporting that we got over the last few days was that Kimmel was actually preparing a monologue that would up the ante against some of the feedback that he got from the Trump administration. I mean, can you imagine, Brian, what might be formulating in terms of a response when he gets back on the air?
Right, Kimmel wanted to defend himself. So now Tuesday night's monologue becomes even more interesting. What he will be critical, and it might affect what local stations decide to do going forward.
Yeah, certainly will. I want to know what you think, Terry, about just sort of the moment that we are in when it comes to free speech. And I also want to play a moment from the White House press briefing today. This was a correspondent for Turning Point USA Frontline, associated with the group that Charlie Kirk founded, who asked the White House press secretary what her message is to Americans who are too afraid to express their beliefs. Here's a brief part of what Caroline Levitt said.
We have a right to free speech in this country. The president supports it. It is protected by our beautiful Constitution. And Americans should not cower in fear. They should rise up in courage to continue speaking the truth.
What do you think about what you're hearing from the White House there as we just get this news that Jimmy Kimmel will return to air tomorrow night?
Right. Well, see what the White House says. Everybody should speak up except the ones that the president doesn't like. He just barked at my former colleague, Jonathan Karl. Maybe we'll come after you. because I don't like the content of your news coverage. All of this is bedrock First Amendment rights that we all have. And I think they've overreached here. Most Americans, even many who support President Trump, did not like the kind of gangster talk that the head of the FCC said, you can do this the easy way, you can do it the hard way. And they understand how precious this right is, even for people that they disagree strongly with. There's good common sense about our First Amendment rights, and I think Trump is running up against that.
Yeah, Senator Ted Cruz said it was out of Goodfellas, to
that.
your point there. Terry, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it. And this is the breaking news just in from Disney. Jimmy Kimmel, his show will return to air tomorrow night. Big news there, as a lot of conservatives who had been very pleased that his show was yanked off the air indefinitely initially were characterizing it as a firing, but his show will return.
Chris, we got a short statement from Disney about this. They said they were in thoughtful conversation with Jimmy Kimmel. What do we know about the decision to bring him back to air?
Well, we know that there were talks that really began between the company and Jimmy on Thursday. This was done at the highest levels, right, between Kimmel himself and Disney CEO Bob Iger, as well as Dana Walden, the head of the TV division there. They took a break over the weekend, and they resumed talks today. And obviously they came to this decision that he's coming back.
Jimmy, we love you. Come back. Jimmy, not a problem. Say whatever you want. Or, Jimmy, wait, you got to think about what you're saying. I don't know. What do we know? I mean, obviously these were behind closed doors, and I'm sure they're being pretty mum about it. But do we have any insight of exactly kind of where, Disney stood on all of this in terms of bringing him back? And, at the same time, I've seen some stories about individuals calling to, cancel your, Disney Plus subscriptions and so on and so forth. Was there pressure on streaming that maybe, made Disney take a second look at all of this? I don't know. I'm just asking. I'm just curious what we know about the context of those conversations and why this happened.
Yeah, I mean, there was pressure everywhere. This, began with just folks in local markets calling their TV stations and saying they were upset about his comments, whether it's Salt Lake City or Nashville or wherever. And that's really what got that, and the comments from the FCC chairman about doing something about this got the station groups, Nexstar, Sinclair to act. ABC was very close behind them in announcing, putting this on hiatus. But ABC did always want Kimmel to come back. And, he's also in a tricky position. Sinclair, in particular, has called for him to apologize and donate money to the Kirk family. There's every indication that he was not long in this job. He wanted to do something else, but he obviously wants to leave on his own terms and not be forced out in this situation. So there's a lot we still don't know, whether he's going to apologize when he gets back on the air, how long he'll stay in this job, if Disney's even going to stick with the late night format.
So what happens now to the comments that Brendan Carr, the chairman of the FCC, made last week, which, even some in his own party, Republican Ted Cruz, for example, had some real concerns with the way that the FCC chairman was going about this. What happens now on that side of things?
Well, he can sort of declare victory either way. He got the station groups to take Kimmel off the air, even if it's a short while. And if they come back, he'll probably say it was their decision. We are, of course, reaching out to the FCC for comment. But, his words certainly got actions, that's for sure.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder, because I feel like the last week or so, we've talked about media in all its forms just really being focused on by President Trump, right? Coming back from the UK, making those comments about, if a network says something that isn't nice, maybe their licenses should be looked at. And I'm paraphrasing. But is the heat off from the White House? I don't know. Like, what's the feel? What's the feel?
I think your
in
paraphrasing was pretty kind. I think the president said that he could just take away their licenses if he didn't like what they were saying about him.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of people have a problem with that from the constitutional standpoint. But this is probably the height of what's been a long-running Trump war on the media. We said last week there's really been no president. Every president has a difficult time with journalists from time to time, but nobody has made this kind of push to the extreme that Trump has, suing them on a regular basis, threatening to take away their licenses on a regular basis, and to a large degree, seeing them kowtow to these efforts. Some people are saying we're sort of in a danger of coming into a state-run media in this country. So a lot of concern on both sides.
But Chris, to be fair, Jimmy Kimmel is not news, it's entertainment. And I am curious, there you are in LA, right, where still so much is done in the entertainment world. And I wonder, movies, actors, producers, directors, they're not afraid to kind of be critical of an administration. I'm not talking about this current one, but this one or another. They're not afraid. And I just wonder what's being talked about in LA and within the kind of Hollywood community about what has happened in the last week. Is there a tremendous pushback against limitations? Yeah.
We saw public statements from the Screen Actors, the Writers Guild. We saw protests in front of the studio, the theater where Kimmel's shot. We saw some prominent actors and producers in that come out, against Disney. We even saw Ted Cruz, Republican senator from Texas, say things are going a little too far. So, there's definitely been a pushback. But at the end of the day, we've also seen these companies capitulate time and time again, and those are the people that underwrite these projects, these movies, these TV shows, and that. And so,
But Chris,
that is happening.
Before we let you go, this also comes at a really challenging time for late night. I mean, Stephen Colbert is on the last year of his contract. He's out after this. The viewership is not what it was in its heyday. People are watching their phones instead of watching the screen at home together every night. By the time people see some of these clips, they're watching them on social media. They're not seeing them live. I mean, the business is completely changing. It's completely changed.
That's right, and it remains to be seen whether all of these shows stick around. Certainly Colbert is going off the air and not being replaced.
So we have a few more minutes to talk about this breaking news. Jimmy Kimmel's return to television before the president at the top of the hour, live from the White House. We'll bring our friend Dominic Patton from Deadline in on all of this. So the suspension ends up being relatively short. There's a lot of speculation about if Kimmel would come back and then when he would come back. Now it's tomorrow night. From where you sit, Dominic, and covering all of this, what was the calculation, you think, from Disney's point of view?
Several days about this, and they've been trying almost since the day he was suspended on September 17th. They've been looking for a pathway, specifically Disney Entertainment boss Dana Walden and Kimmel and his team. A lot of push and pull about how that's going to happen, what he will and will not be allowed to say on air. But clearly the backlash was growing. You saw today, first of all, early this morning, Howard Stern added his name to the people who are canceling their Disney Plus subscription in support of Kimmel. Then you saw over 400 names, some very big stars like Meryl Streep and others, signing a ACLU letter. So this was starting to have a big effect on the very publicity and media-sensitive CEO Bob Iger and others. So clearly they were trying to find a deal. We had heard rumors over the weekend, but nothing came together. Now clearly they have. It's going to be interesting to see what tomorrow night looks like.
Any expectation on your end on that front? Like, how do you think Kimmel will handle it on the air?
Well, I think Jimmy's a pro, and he's going to handle it like a pro, and I think they've struck a deal, and he's going to go with the deal they struck. But I think you're going to see a lot of nuance. Also be interesting, we don't know yet, who the guests are going to be.
It will. Like, who do you book? Okay. And I think one thing that's I don't think is known yet is, will the show be carried by all the affiliates? Because remember, that's how all of this started, was that, Nexstar, which is News Nation's parent company, Sinclair, the station owners acted first, it seemed. Then it was Disney. Do you think it'll be on the air across the country?
Very hard to tell. Neither Nexstar nor Sinclair have said anything yet, but I don't think Disney would have made this decision without talking to them. Clearly, there is a rift there. There's a rift ideologically. There's a rift in terms of markets. You know, the big markets are still owned by stations are owned by ABC Disney directly. So we're going to see where that rift is. But I would be honest. There's a reason, and you've heard me say it before, my friend. Yeah. They call it show business, not show friends. Clearly, nobody wants to lose money on this.
Right. So how did this all play out then in terms of where the pressure was coming from and how you were talking about this a moment ago, some of that may have changed and now the pressure is coming from the other side. I mentioned a few minutes ago these threats of boycotts or the protests and the effect that had.
Well, I think it's a lot of things. I think if we live in a very competitive media market. And I think a lot of that is, some people say there's no such thing as bad publicity. I beg to differ. Clearly, in this example, Bob Iger and the people at Disney, one of the things they value the most is their relationships with talent. Those relationships have clearly become strained over the past couple days. The support for Kimmel has been widespread. Protests in front of the Disney headquarters in Burbank. I think they were just very sensitive to the optics of this, and I think they were very sensitive to the politics of it.
What's your understanding from reporting on this about his support in the building or in the company? They're very strong?
Well, we reported last week as an exclusive that we called it the descent at Disney in the upper levels. There was a lot of people were disappointed with the decision that was made by Walden and Iger. A lot of people were keeping it to themselves because they didn't want to see retribution or retaliation, but that was clearly something that was occurring. And it was very much the thing that was fueling some of the talks that were happening virtually the next day in Kimmel's lawyer's office.
Yeah, I'm struck by what you said a few minutes ago. I hadn't thought of that right away since it just broke. But, who do you book and what type of show do you put on after something like this? I mean, there's a couple of ways I guess you could go. You could do, which would be, I guess, more out of character, like a more serious show, talk about free speech and all that kind of thing. Or you could say something at the beginning, Dominic, which is probably more likely, and then do the quote-unquote normal show. Hey, here's what we do, make people laugh type of approach.
Well, I can't tell you, my friend. I mean, I know that I'm getting a ton of texts and information about this, so I've got to bolt. But, I think it's going to be interesting to see the way they play it out. I wonder if we're going to see an updated version of the opening that Jimmy Kimmel planned to give last week to talk about the Charlie Kirk scandal that he had found himself in and the fallout and response that he felt MAGA was delivering to that. Of course, we saw the Charlie Kirk memorial yesterday, and that's changed a lot of things. Of course, we saw President Trump come out raging there, too. So a lot of X factors here, my friend. I got to go.
Have a good one, Dominic. We always appreciate it.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our News Nation app.
Here's that breaking news one more time. Disney has just announced that Jimmy Kimmel will return to television tomorrow, saying in a statement last Wednesday, we made the decision to suspend production on the show to avoid further inflaming a tense situation at an emotional moment for our country. It is a decision we made because we felt some of the comments were ill-timed and thus insensitive. We have spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy. And after those conversations, we reached the decision to return the show on Tuesday. Joining us now, Puck senior correspondent Dylan Byers. Is this a surprise, Dylan?
It's not a surprise that he was going to come back. I think that was what Disney had been telegraphing from the beginning. I mean, in many ways, the only person who might have called an end to that, I think, was Jimmy Kimmel himself, if he recognized an opportunity here to walk. Look, there's a lot to unpack here. On the one hand, Disney is still caught, I think, between a rock and a hard place when it comes to, their intention to sort of do the right thing here, frankly, and also satisfy the creative community, satisfy Hollywood. But I don't necessarily foresee pressure from the Trump administration or the FCC going away. So how they navigate that, and I think it's going to be really interesting to watch what sort of agreement they came to with Kimmel in terms of what he's going to say on air when he comes back on the show tomorrow night. Because, of course, sort of the original catalyst here for Disney suspending his show, at least in their words, is that they sort of wanted to ratchet down, take down the temperature, cool things off, because, as they say in that statement, it was a very emotionally sensitive moment in the country. Now, Jimmy had some things that he wanted to say. Disney clearly had some things they did not want him to say. Where did they net out here? And what is he going to say in that opening monologue that is going to simultaneously, I think, appease Disney while also making the sort of statement that a guy like Jimmy Kimmel wants to make about this issue?
So Brendan Carr, by the way, was at a forum earlier today in New York City. He defended the Jimmy Kimmel comments. He said Jimmy is in the situation that he's in because of his ratings, not because of anything that's happened at the federal government level. Obviously, that doesn't line up with the sequence of events. The New York Times did a great timeline on how this whole thing unfolded. Jimmy Kimmel made the statements on Monday night. Not much of a reaction to them. Neither was there much of a reaction Tuesday morning. It wasn't until a few accounts that, have the job of clipping late night shows, looking for what they see as liberal bias, clipping them, and then that stuff being amplified by a certain set of highly followed people like Elon Musk. That's when a car got involved, and that's when Sinclair made their decision. And after that is when ABC made its decision. So obviously the pressure is clear on the one side for Bob Iger from the government. What about the pressure on the other side? Who was he hearing from? How loud was it? How big was the demand for him to resolve the Kimmel issue with Kimmel coming back on air?
Well, look, obviously the blowback was intense. And I think if the intention was to dial down the energy, I think anyone who's lived in this country for the last few days know that really didn't happen. And there was, a sort of statement signed on by many of the biggest stars in Hollywood. That statement, frankly, was sort of weak. They didn't necessarily threaten any action or said they were going to stop working with Disney. But look, if you're Bob Iger and if you're Disney, you pride yourself on the integrity of your company and on your relationship with that creative community. And I think the blowback was only going to snowball from there, right? And do you see, potentially canceled Disney Plus subscriptions in a material way? Do you see big creators not actually deciding or making a statement that they are not going to work with Disney? I mean, potentially. Back to your point about late night, though, Katie. Like, all things can be true here. It's definitely true that late night television is not a great business. You're not going to book any media executive on your show who's going to come forward and say, "Oh no, there's a bright future for late night." I mean, we are looking at in Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, and Stephen Colbert, whose show, of course, is also not coming back. We're looking at sort of the last generation of marquee late night hosts who are sort of household names in this country, or at least in parts of this country. That business is going away, but none of that negates the timeline that you brought up, which is that this happened because of FCC pressure, because of pressure from Nexstar and Sinclair, which clearly got the message about what Brendan Carr was saying and what it was that he wanted. And then because Disney, which is really stuck in this hard place, a lot of business leaders are trying to figure out how to navigate an administration that is brazenly transactional. Disney made the choice that it did. Now, can this become water under the bridge, right? Can you bring back Jimmy Kimmel and can you patch everything up? Maybe you're still going to have that pressure from the Trump administration, and we're going to see what he says on Tuesday night.
Well, so I'm interested in that angle of it, because I wonder if Bob Iger or other media executives have looked at the landscape and looked at just the unfolding events in the last few days and seen that capitulation or trying to get in good with the administration, it doesn't necessarily get them the ends that they're looking for. I mean, Donald Trump is still going after John Karl aggressively in the Oval Office or on the White House lawn, calling him a bad person, calling him a bad journalist, saying that he should get fired. I mean, it's not as if the pressure on media organizations or news organizations that are contained within these companies has lessened over the past few days.
No, that's absolutely right. And I'm going to borrow a line that I read somewhere. I'm sorry, you'll have to forgive me. I've been reading and listening to a lot about this, so apologies to the author because I forget where this came from. But if a bully comes for your lunch money and you give him your lunch money, that bully is not going to just go away and not come back the next day asking for more. That's not how that works. And if you look back and you say, okay, what was the first moment in Trump 2.0 when we saw a Hollywood executive or an entertainment executive show signs of capitulation to this administration? And it was Bob Iger. It was that $15 million settlement over the George Stephanopoulos lawsuit from Trump, plus $1 million for legal fees, that sort of set a standard for what the street price was for settling lawsuits that Trump brought against broadcast networks and against entertainment companies. Does anyone looking at the Kimmel situation right now and the pressure from Carr think that he got the monkey off of his back? Obviously, he did not.
No, I think I read that too. I want to say a version of it was Brian Stelter, but I think he was quoting somebody else. And I think there was an F-bomb contained in it that we can't say. We can say
That's right.
It's cable, but we're not going to out of, respect for the audience, clearly. Let's bring in a writer for Status, our friend Oliver Darcy, to this conversation. So, Oliver, I know you've been listening in. What else do you want to add?
I mean, I think this is a result of a lot of the backlash that Disney has faced. I don't know if they anticipated this much backlash, but they're obviously getting tremendous pressure from their customers who are some of them canceling Disney Plus, and particularly from the Hollywood community. And so I think they were really left with no choice. I think at the end, Disney was probably working with Kimmel to desperately get him back on air as soon as possible, given the immense amount of scrutiny that they faced. And I'm not surprised that this happened, but I'm very curious too to see whether some of these local stations continue or take the program tomorrow night. We had seen the right-wing station owner Sinclair say that they wanted Jimmy Kimmel to apologize to Charlie Kirk's family and to also donate to Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA. I can't imagine that Jimmy Kimmel will do that, but how does Nexstar react if he doesn't? I think that's an open question we're going to figure out. I imagine Disney probably worked it out with them behind the scenes, but I'll be curious how they respond.
Yeah, that is a good point, Dylan. The before ABC made its decision, Sinclair, Nexstar took the show off the air. Is Disney speaking for them as well? Would they have coordinated this behind the scenes before they put him back on air?
Look, I don't know, and obviously this statement just came out recently, but what I would say is that if you are Bob Iger and Dana Walden at Disney, you are probably trying to think a few chess moves ahead. And you don't want to put yourself in a position now where you're going to war against the broadcasters, against Sinclair and, against Sinclair and Nexstar, right? That's not a good look either. What you're trying to do here is put out every fire across the board, and that means getting Sinclair and getting Nexstar on board before you put out an announcement like this, which my assumption is that that's where they netted out, but I can't be sure.
Do we know any of the numbers on how many folks were threatening Oliver to unsubscribe from Hulu? I mean, I know there's news articles about it, but what if there are any hard numbers, would we ever see them?
We never see them, but I mean, Howard Stern went on the air today and said he canceled his Disney Plus subscription as a result of this. And I've seen, obviously, a number of people post screenshots online saying they're canceling. So do we know how many? Is it a significant amount to Disney's bottom line? Probably not. But, when you have someone like Howard Stern saying, I'm canceling in support of Jimmy Kimmel, that's a problem for Disney. And I think, usually the way these stories work is if you can see a little bit of the backlash in public-facing view, it's usually like 1,000 times worse behind the scenes. So I imagine Disney's been getting a lot of scrutiny from creatives saying, we want Jimmy Kimmel back on the air, and we don't want to do business with a company that throws someone under the bus for the Trump administration. It's a big problem for them, and so that's why you've seen them rush to get this deal done, I think. And I was thinking they wanted to get it done as soon as possible because this was creating a lot of problems behind the scenes.
To this day, don't know why he said what he said. So something about this says to me that Kimmel wanted this to happen.
Fronting evil. Bill O'Reilly. Bill, great to have you back on Uncensored. Before we get into Kimmel, just in all your time in news, where does this Charlie Kirk assassination rank, do you think, in terms of significance?
One of the top 5 stories of this year, 2025. It will be not forgotten, I don't think ever, in this generation, because all of America focused, and that's hard to get the folks to do with the cell phone era. A lot of people don't understand the story and what really happened there. But I think Mr. Kirk's legacy is going to be a revival of the Christian conservative movement in America. I think they're going to get a lot more traction with his widow running Turning Point. So that'll probably be his legacy.
You must have, like me, had a lot of threats over the years. To actually see somebody murdered like that in open air at an event simply for having opinions that the shooter didn't like, what does that make you feel?
Well, it was worse than that. So my book, Confronting Evil, came out September 9th. And I woke up September 10th, my birthday, to find Putin, who's on a cover of Confronting Evil, lobbing missiles into Poland. And then a few hours later, Charlie Kirk being assassinated in Utah. And I've been doing, obviously, promotion for the book. One interviewer said, that was haunting. The release of your book was haunting, with the rise of evil that we're seeing the world over. And I think that was accurate. So I was drawn into this maelstrom, and I have, of course, had no idea. I'm not Nostradamus here, but I did know a year ago that the rise of evil in the United States and throughout the world was starting to get very troubling, almost like the beginning of the 1930s. And that's why I decided to write the book. Now, Mr. Kirk himself died because of his political opinions. There's no question about that. That's why he was targeted. And the unintended consequences have now gone into all kinds of different areas of expression.
The Jimmy Kimmel saga is still ongoing. We don't quite know how it will all play out yet. You know, my view of it, for what it's worth, is people talk a lot about free speech, and the reality about free speech is I don't think it should be criminalized or governed by government unless people actually say criminal stuff. In other words, if I say, I'm plotting to kill you, Bill O'Reilly, tomorrow night at your home, that's clearly something which crosses the line. It shouldn't be covered by free speech. Jimmy Kimmel is perfectly entitled to say a disgusting thing as he did about Charlie Kirk, but at the same time, he's accountable to his employers, and that's where it gets interesting. And I know that you've got insight into how this went down. What I didn't like, Bill, in the process was the FCC chair, a pro-Trump political appointee, Brendan Carr, publicly kind of threatening, almost like a mafia don, kind of threatening we can do it the easy way or the hard way, because that looks like government interference in a private company like ABC, Disney, making a decision based on perhaps other commercial imperatives. What did you feel about that part of it? Because it's that part of it that I think most journalists are concerned about.
Well, if I were Mr. Carr, I would not have made the statement, but he has the power to do so. So the three networks, and people around the world don't understand that, the three networks use what they call the public airways. Therefore, there are government regulations on them that they must operate within the public interest. That is the headline. So ABC, NBC, CBS have to operate within the public interest. That's subjective. But Carr has the right to go in and investigate anything that he believes is not in the public interest. And I'll submit this to you. There's almost a total blackout in the United States for non-liberal voices on the network news. Did you know that, Piers?
Yeah, no, it's obvious. Yeah.
It's been in place ever since Donald Trump got into the political arena. I'm the best-selling nonfiction author in the world. As you know, anybody putting me on TV gets higher ratings. People want it, what that crazy O'Reilly is going to say today. I can't get booked on a Today Show or Good Morning America or any of the late night shows. Why? Because I'm not a liberal. Jimmy Kimmel didn't book one liberal in 3 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So the FCC, and there's no denying that the Trump administration despises people who it deems have treated Donald Trump unfairly. There's no denying that. But the FCC says, hold it. Is this in the public interest? Where you have the three networks blacking out, excluding every voice that isn't non-liberal, that isn't a liberal voice. You can't plug a movie, a book, a recording. You can't have a dialogue. Now, I used to be on Kimmel and Letterman and Leno all the time because the ratings are so good, and The View all the time. But that changed, and the corporations, they were fine with it. Disney led the league in it. So you're telling me that that's not an attack on freedom of speech? So these 400 movie stars, TV stars, oh, Jimmy Kimmel, oh, well, what about the blackout? And I'm not a what about guy. I'm not. That's ridiculous. You gotta keep it into what you're talking about here. But there wasn't a word from the left because the left benefited from this. And that was the biggest assault on freedom of speech I've ever seen in my lifetime. Now, for Kimmel, the reason he got taken off the air, and this is, again, people who don't live in the United States, the stations in states like Utah and Idaho and Mississippi and Alabama are getting crushed by their viewership. Saying, why are you running this guy every night hating Trump? Every night, why are you doing that? So the stations themselves are under pressure from their audience, not in San Francisco or LA or New York. And that's why that happened. And then Kimmel hit the turning point. Now, I always got along well with Jim. And I, to this day, don't know why he said what he said in the wake of the Kirk assassination. That's just absurd. And he's smarter than that. So something about this says to me that Kimmel wanted this to happen. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but he's got 10 writers and producers. Nobody flagged him to this. Just doesn't stack. You and I have been in the business a long time. If we're going to say something that blows everything up, people are going to come over and go, you sure you want to do this?
Today's show is brought to you by Oxford Natural, makers of the Optimum Day. Is there a danger? I've been watching a lot of people reacting to this, and I agree with everything you've said. But is there a danger in people on the right playing into the same place that they have always criticized the woke left in particular of occupying, which is the enemy of free speech, wanting to cancel people, wanting people to lose their jobs over things that they've said? I mean, for example, I'll play you a clip. This is of Kimmel reacting to the cancellations of Tucker from Fox and Roseanne Barr from his own network, ABC. Let's take a look.
That's right. Fox News has severed bow ties with Tucker Carlson. After all these years, they are parting ways, which means he was fired. I mean, that's really what parting ways means.
What would have been interesting, Bill, would have been if the conservative right to a man and woman had just reacted by saying he shouldn't be fired. Right? It would have absolutely exposed the hypocrisy if on the left, if they had just not called for him to go. It seems that I reckon Kimmel was going to get fired anyway based on ratings and how much money it was costing, just like we saw with Stephen Colbert. It would have been a natural thing to happen. But by demanding he be fired and gleefully celebrating it, is the right not falling into that trap of behaving exactly the way they've always attacked the left for behaving?
Well, the quote is, when they go lower, we go higher, right?
Right.
That was Michelle Obama. But extremists never go higher. That's why they're extremists. So you're hearing the amplification of voices on both the left and the right that are not rank and file. They're loons. They're people who don't want to hear the other point of view, who despise the other point of view, and oftentimes want to hurt the other point of view. You open this conversation with you and me and a lot of controversial people have always been in danger. I had to have security live in my house for a time. Even now, when I go to events, like the Yankee Stadium event 10 days ago with Donald Trump, it was security, massive security. We all know that there is a danger to speaking your mind. And that's why a lot of people won't do it. But you're never going to get the extremes on the right and the left to be logical. That's why the word extreme exists. They're fanatics. And you've seen that all throughout history.
Just final word for you, Bill. In the memorial service, you had the kind of two really memorable moments. One was Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow, saying she'd forgiven the assassin. And then you had almost immediately afterwards Donald Trump, the president, saying, you know, he could never do that. He hates his opponents and sorry, he apologized. He was kind of half joking, but not really. What did you make of those two moments? And was Trump, was that a sensible thing to do, following what Erica Kirk had said, to sort of ratchet things up about hating opponents?
Well, number one, the comments by the president were not scripted. They were off the cuff, and he does that all the time. I thought it was an extraordinary moment for America when Erica Kirk said that she forgave the man that killed her husband. And you have to put it in this kind of context. What did she say to her 3-year-old daughter? And when her 1-year-old son becomes cognizant, what does she say? They don't have a daddy. Yet she stood up there in front of millions and said, I am a Christian. I believe in Jesus. Jesus forgave the people who murdered him on the cross, and I'm going to do the same thing. Just step back for a moment with all the emotion flying and go, that's just absolutely extraordinary for a human being to do that. Now, Donald Trump was honest when he said, he has a very hard time emulating Erica Kirk. And I can identify with that. It's very hard for me to forgive the people that have just tried to destroy me and my family, who've harmed me and my family. I know who they are. I know what they've done. Very hard. And I say to my priest, because I actually go to church every Sunday, go to Mass. I have to. I can't get behind in the atoning. But I say, look, if somebody asks me for forgiveness, if they say they're sorry, I'll forgive them like that. But these people have no remorse, and they'll hurt other people. And I have a very hard time with that. And that's the essence of confronting evil. All 15 men in the book, they did the most heinous things you could do. None of them showed any remorse at all. And so the question for the theologians is, are we collectively supposed to forgive Hitler and Mao and these other people, Lee Harvey Oswald? It's very, very difficult. But I admire what Erica Kirk did, because that is such a positive message. But I have to be honest, myself, I'm like Donald Trump in that regard. I have a very, very hard time.
You know, if I'm honest, I'm probably more sided with you guys than I would be with Erica Kirk, and that's why it was such an extraordinary thing for her to do and said. I was interested that Trump said, you know, he's going to talk to Erica and maybe they can persuade him. I think probably good luck with that, but it would be very interesting to hear those conversations, particularly as he's become, I think, more profound about his faith since surviving the assassination attempt on his life. I've talked to him about that. One word answer to my last question, Bill. Is there any way back for Kimmel at ABC, do you think?
Sure. I don't like what happened to Jim. As I said, I had a good relationship with him. He was respectful to me when I was on his program. But at this point, what I would advise him to do, and here's an interesting thing. I offered about a year ago, through Adam Carolla, one of his best friends, I saw where Kimmel was going. I saw it. I've been around a long time on TV. And I said, look, tell Jim I want to talk to him. Because you can do the satire, you can get your point across. You can do all that without being hateful, without being, you know, a person who's just loathing, okay? But Kimmel never called. And I know Carolla passed on the message. But I don't think he should be banished or canceled, but I think he needs a little bit of time off.
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting because Jimmy Fallon did invite Greg Gutfeld on from Fox, and it was a very highly rated show. So in a way, this refusal to have anyone from the right on is self-harming, because it always leads to a bigger audience. I don't know why they would do it. I mean, for the View in particular, to only have one view now, which is they all hate Trump, is pathetic. Bill, I've got to leave it there. Thank you very much. It's great to have you on Uncensored, always. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Piers, thanks for having me in.
Well, joining me now to debate Charlie Kirk, Jimmy Kimmel, and the battle for free speech is the CEO of Timcast Media, Tim Pool, the man the New Yorker has called the future of late night, host of the hugely successful show The Adam Friedland Show, comedian Adam Friedland, the author of Fox News contributor Kat Timpf, and the comedian and commentator John Fugelsang, the author of the new book Separation of Church and Hate. Well, welcome to all of you. Kat, let me start with you, because I do think the Kimmel story is quite a complex one. Instinctively, we all believe in free speech. Instinctively, we don't like to see people cancelled for just having an opinion. And people on the right have been particularly exercised about this, rightly, because of the way the woke left have behaved with cancel culture for years. But you were interesting on Gutfeld. You said that while you were disgusted by the comment that Kimmel made, the FCC's actions bothered you as well. And Ted Cruz has said similar, as have others on the right. I think Ben Shapiro did too. Just explain what the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, said publicly bothered you.
Yeah, the FCC is not supposed to be engaged in the nuances of content moderation. The public interest statute's not been interpreted this way before. For me, it's pretty simple. He's talking about, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And then a few hours later, Jimmy Kimmel's no more. And this is especially concerning given the fact that Nexstar is looking for the FCC to approve a merger that would make them a lot of money. I simply don't see that as a coincidence. And I simply do not think that that is appropriate or good to have the FCC, an arm of the federal government, engaging in content moderation in that way, regardless of how you feel about Jimmy Kimmel, regardless of how you feel about what he said. And I heard what Bill O'Reilly just said about how you can't imagine how he went forward with that statement saying that, hey, there's just kind of essentially saying it's delusional to believe that the shooter was anything but MAGA. And I honestly think that that's because maybe he kept himself in such a bubble that he didn't even have anyone who would moderate him in saying, hey, we don't know yet, or something along those lines. But to me, that's all irrelevant. To me, I've spent my entire career espousing the importance of free speech. It's easy for me to say, hey, when the FCC has this influence, that's not a good thing. And it's been disheartening to see people on the right who have behaved as though they don't even know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Employees have consequences for their employers. What do you mean? And they don't even bring up the FCC angle. I think there's people out there that don't even know about the FCC angle because so many people talk about it so just let me know if you think that this whole FCC thing is just a coincidence out of all the things that Jimmy Kimmel's ever said about conservatives, which there are many. After the FCC says that's when this happens, especially with this merger on the line. If you think that's just a coincidence, then let me know. But I don't think it's just a coincidence. But also, tell me to my face that you can't possibly see how I might think that one thing has to do with the other.
Tim Pool, you've called out those defending Kimmel. You said liberals celebrated Charlie's death and cry over Kimmel's firing. I literally don't care what they say anymore. Dark days indeed. But as somebody who I know has often been appalled by the cancel culture which enveloped our society for the last few years, do you feel comfortable with the way many on the right are gleefully celebrating Kimmel getting fired, urging more draconian action against him and against other late night stars and so on for being anti-Trump and so on? Is it not really the same kind of behavior that you guys on the right would castigate the left for doing?
I can't speak for anyone but myself, so I don't know about what draconian measures people would ask for. I certainly wouldn't support that. But Jimmy Kimmel got fired, according to the Wall Street Journal and the Hollywood Reporter, because he refused to apologize. He wasn't planning on apologizing. He, in fact, was planning on furthering the commentary, criticizing MAGA for twisting his words. According to the Wall Street Journal, the executives approached him on his side saying, they were actually going to defend him. But the advertisers and the affiliates were upset over the comments that he made portraying the assassin as a MAGA guy. When Jimmy Kimmel expressed his desire to further that line that he had pressed the day before, that's when they had a private meeting and decided to pull his show. So I do believe the FCC comments obviously played a role. I think it was multifaceted. But I've said this since cancel culture was more in the news with many on the left getting people canceled on the right. If you own a company and someone says something objectionable, which threatens the existence of your company, I don't care if that person gets fired. If someone at my company was going on social media and posting abhorrent racist things, I'd fire them too. The issue with cancel culture is that people were being fired for things that were not objectionable. There was a Netflix executive who got fired for simply describing the racial slurs they would not allow on Netflix. Papa John got fired and removed from his company, name stripped from universities, for lamenting the fact that the colonel used a racial slur and got away with it. And there was no criticism. In fact, in one instance, a NASCAR driver lost sponsorship because his father used a racial slur in the 80s. That's cancel culture. Pulling Sarah Silverman off a movie because 10 years ago she did a blackface joke, that's cancel culture. Bud Light facing a massive sales backlash and having their beer pulled from stores and bars, Target losing customers and being criticized. This is consumer backlash. So I certainly don't think a teacher who criticizes Charlie Kirk should get fired. What I will add on top of this is the real reason stated by the reporting from various outlets, left and right, was that Jimmy Kimmel was going to continue that line the next day. And that caused concern they would lose more advertisers at a time when Jimmy Kimmel's ratings are down 43% and he's costing them millions of dollars. So if the FCC is to come out and say, we are going to get you taken off the air, that's a bad thing. But I think it's important that we discuss the context around when a business has a right to say, you are threatening the existence of our company.
Adam Freeland, I interviewed Jay Leno about a year and a half ago, and he was really interesting about...
Wow.
Yeah, it was actually great. I went to his car garage in LA. We had a great few hours. I loved it. But what I liked about what he said was, he believed in like teasing and gently mocking all politicians from all sides.
Correct.
And he talked about the kind of real sort of golden period of Johnny Carson. Nobody knew Johnny Carson's politics at all. And yet, if you've watched late night comedy in America in the last 10 years, since Trump became a politician, all of them, almost two, they're all middle-aged white guys, which always makes me laugh when you think about the diversity push, which never seemed to attack late-night comedy. But they all, to me, developed an increasing loathing of Trump, which began to really distort what their actual job was, which was to make Americans laugh late at night. I stopped watching them quite a long time ago. I could not watch it. Jimmy Fallon, I would kind of keep out of this. I think he's always been a lighter touch, but I think Kimmel and I think Colbert in particular, they really went hard in the anti-Trump rhetoric. The View, it doesn't have a alternate views. It has one view. They all hate Trump.
Very
they all
funny
They all came out in black funereal clothes after he won again. And I don't think these serve their viewers, and I don't think they serve their companies. But I also feel uneasy, as Kat said, about the FCC poking its nose publicly into making not even veiled threats, but direct threats that if ABC, Disney didn't take action against Kimmel, then they were going to pay the consequences. So where do you sit with all this?
Listen, I'm new to your audience, so just to introduce myself, I am a tell it like it is comedian, and no one's safe from my jokes, be it bratty kids, celebrities, politicians, people that just walk by, they're all fair game. But it is still deeply unconstitutional and immoral for the president to silence his enemies. But I think what's important now, especially because it's so crazy right now, is that we zoom out as like people, like human beings. And like there's a lot of kind of empathy being expressed towards Kimmel right now. But where's the empathy for Donald Trump? Certainly what it seems like to me is that he feels like he's been bullied. And I've been a victim of bullying my entire life, and still I am regularly. I'm on the internet. But I've always said to my bullies, like while it's disrespectful, rude, hurtful for them to be saying that, I support their constitutional right to be saying things about me that aren't true. So, you know, previous Democratic administrations have gotten the same treatment from conservative comics like Dennis Miller, Michael Richards, Kill Tony. I'm sure a lot of that caused Joe Biden a lot of pain, but never were their constitutional rights violated by the executive branch of the government. And I think that is what the clear difference is here. And I think for all of us as a culture, we have to ask ourselves, like, is the president suffering right now from being made fun of? And the truth is this, like 30% of Americans suffer from depression, and there's a stigma. And if that is indeed true, like he should feel equipped to get help. And it is a
all right, I detect a slight sarcasm to your
I'm
tone.
not. No.
Well, no,
Listen,
here's the point I've made. I don't think Trump feels bullied or hurt or any of those things. I think what he feels.
So why?
Here's what I think he feels. So he actually spelled it out in the last few days. There's no doubt, as he said, that about 99% of all the coverage of Trump on all these late night shows and The View and all these other, mainstream media shows has been Trump bashing. It's never been that percentage historically with anybody else. It was never like that with Obama. It wasn't like it with Reagan. It wasn't like it with Clinton. It's never been so skewed. I think Donald Trump brings a lot of it on himself, but I also think there's no doubt, no one can argue to me sensibly, that Trump has not had a more relentlessly vicious, negative treatment from shows that used to be much more bipartisan in their mockery than Trump. So I think that all these things can be true, right? But
he also comes from television, right? And so it's something that he pays close attention to.
Yeah.
Ratings, he talks about they're being very unfair to me, unfair treatment. And this is something that he's like locked in on constantly. So, I mean, to some extent, if these are low-rated shows that are taking jabs at him, vicious jabs sometimes, that doesn't really pose much of a threat to his power if not a lot of people are watching them. But for him, it's something that he's like zoned in on, perhaps.
Okay, well,
and that's what happened with Jim.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated with Jimmy Kimmel. John Sugel, let me bring you in here. You said the Kimmel suspension shows how brittle, unmanly, and frightened the Trump White House is. I would add that they're angry about the way they've been treated for years by the mainstream media, rightly or wrongly, and they're vengeful, and they're thoroughly enjoying Jimmy Kimmel, one of their most ardent protagonists, getting his comeuppance, which is a kind of human reaction you would not find surprising in someone like Trump. Again, those things can all be true. Yeah, I mean, from your point of view, I remember, for example, here's an example of cancel culture at its worst, where I don't remember anyone on the Liberal side coming to her aid. I got bounced out of my job hosting Good Morning Britain for disbelieving Meghan Markle in her Oprah Winfrey interview. And it made a lot of headlines. I said, I don't believe her. And nobody raced to my defense, by the way, on the Liberal left, even though I've always identified as a liberal kind of guy myself. But then a worse thing happened. I was fine about it. I was tired of getting out of bed that early anyway. Sharon Osbourne was on The Talk on CBS, and she got jumped by Sheryl Underwood, who was one of her co-panelists, who was an African-American woman, who accused her of supporting a racist. And Sharon said, well, what's he said that's racist? And Sheryl Underwood couldn't actually explain. She sort of went on a long tangent about how it's kind of, if you say things a certain way, blah, 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 blah. Well, obviously, I'd said nothing
referring
racist.
To whom, Piers? I'm sorry, referring to whom?
Well, Sheryl Underwood was saying that I had been racist. She was inferring I'd said racist things about Meghan Markle, which I hadn't at all. And everyone knew I hadn't.
Okay.
But because Sharon...
I'm sorry.
Because Sharon said, well, it's fine, but I was annoyed for Sharon. Here's what happened. Nobody supported Sharon. She got suspended. She then got bullied into making a tearful apology, sort of begging for mercy, really, over nothing. She'd done nothing wrong other than show me support as a friend. We used to work together on America's Got Talent. And then she got fired anyway. But what I remember most of all about it, nobody on the Liberal left gave a damn that Sharon Osbourne's career got ruined in that way on American television, simply for saying that I hadn't said racist things when I hadn't. So there's a lot of double standards about all this. It's like, depending who you are. When Tucker Carlson, I showed earlier with Bill O'Reilly a clip of Jimmy Kimmel gleefully celebrating Tucker Carlson being fired, gleefully celebrating Roseanne Barr being fired from ABC and so on. So it's interesting to me to see who people race to defend when it comes to free speech. There's a lot of hypocrisy. What do you think?
If I may, Roseanne was fired by a private corporation for making racist comments that would hurt that corporation's bottom line, and Tucker Carlson was fired for repeated lies that cost his private corporation $750 million. They were not fired because of abuse of power, which is the case here.
But is it the case? Okay, but John, is it the case here? Or could it be that Kimmel did exactly what you've just articulated? He was hitting his company on the bottom line. Local TV station owners were pulling the plug. They were saying, we don't want to air it. In other words, is it not the same thing? But because he's a liberal, darling left guy, everyone's framing it in a different way.
No, this was government. This was abuse of power. This was Brendan Carr saying the quiet part out loud in public, which was very stupid of him because it's going to make sure this issue never goes away. At least with Colbert, they kept this on the down low. If you actually look at Kimmel's comments, I don't really understand why there hasn't been a more forceful defense mounted. He said that MAGA folks spent the weekend trying to assert that this killer was not one of theirs, and then said they spent the weekend trying to blame everybody else. That's really a very fair comment. It was in no way besmirching Mr. Kirk or the grief that many people were feeling. There's been a lot of exploitation over this, and whenever anything of this kind of violence happens, it always brings out the best in some people and the worst in others, and many of us on the left and right will exploit any tragedy to go ahead and hate on the people we already hate. In this case, however, this was going to happen no matter what, and Brendan Carr has always envisioned this. He is an architect of Project 2025. These other cases you talk about are private corporations, and look, this administration has taken a lot of pleasure in a lot of Americans losing their job. They take delight in it. And there's a lot of talented people who work on this show that I hope will not be losing their jobs, because you know Bob Iger is negotiating heavily with Nexstar right now to try to put a happy ending on all this, because Bob Iger doesn't want champion of censorship to be stapled to his obituary when he leaves. When Michael Eisner is the voice of morality against Bob Iger, my God, what have we come to? Kimmel's going to be fine. He'll find a job somewhere, as will Colbert. They're very, very wealthy, but this is something that's unprecedented. We haven't seen the government doing this. And in both cases, they were contingent on bribes. This is more corruption that we're all used to in this country. This was about putting a merger through. Bob Iger was looking at the stock price. He wanted to make this merger go through, and he made the Kimmel problem go away because he was hinted to do that by the government. This is self-cancellation by intimidation. It's grotesquely against the First Amendment, and these guys are not going to look good in the history books for doing it.
Well, joining me now is the editor-in-chief of Semaphore and host of the Mixed Signals podcast, Ben Smith. Ben, great to have you on Uncensored. Your debut, I think.
Thank you for, I believe it is. That's
very exciting moment.
For both with Adam Friedland, no less.
Yes, exactly. Ben, what do you, John Fugelsang just made a pretty full throttle attack on the way the Trump administration, as he sees it, is flexing its muscles against media companies to get rid of critics and so on. Do you see it that way, or is it a little bit more complicated?
You know, I talked to Brendan Carr actually about this in February, because I think the thing that John was saying that I think most people in our world would say is that the biggest threat to free speech in the United States is the government. That's why the First Amendment restricts the government, not private actors. And that's, the kind of longstanding consensus view. And it really is not how the Trump administration sees the world. And when I talked to Carr, I kind of put that to him. Don't you think, obviously, the primary threat to speech in the United States is you, the government, always has been. And he said no. He think that the biggest threat to free speech was the big social media companies. And I think the reality is that the Trump administration, starting with Trump himself, feel that very, very personally. There are people whose, in some cases, their kind of formative political experiences are getting tossed off Twitter and Facebook. For Trump, certainly a very intense experience. And so I think setting aside the law here, setting aside the fact the First Amendment just literally does restrict the government, not private corporations, their view in a kind of intuitive way is that, look, those guys did that to us, and so we're going to do it to them.
Right. And there's no doubt they did. I remember the same people screaming how unfair it is that Jimmy Kimmel has been suspended, screaming their glee at Trump being thrown off Facebook and Twitter and the rest of them. and seeing no apparent contradiction there.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, a broad consensus